Begin with our explainer of the day, the one where we take you through everything you need to know about the new travel guidelines that have come into India because of the new variant of concern, Omicron. So India is not likely to resume commercial international passenger flights from December 15th as had been decided earlier. But starting 1st December, tougher, more stringent protocols have been put into place for these at-risk nations. What exactly are they? I'll tell you in a bit. First, let's understand which all nations actually fall in this at-risk category. Roughly about 13 of them at the moment. It includes UK, about 11 other countries in Europe, South Africa, Brazil, Bangladesh, and several other countries like China, Zimbabwe, Singapore, Hong Kong, and even Israel. Now, having understood that, let's tell you what the instructions are. And so when you land up in India from these at-risk nations, you will have to undergo a compulsory RT-PCR test on arrival. Not rapid, remember, but an RT-PCR test. If positive, it will lead to institutional quarantine. If negative, you will still have to home quarantine and you will be tested on the 2nd day, on the 4th day and on the 7th day as well. That's for pan-India, but some states at the moment have rules of their own. Maharashtra, for example, has decided to have mandatory 7-day institutional quarantine. There, if you're landing, then a positive will mean shifted to a hospital directly. A negative will mean home quarantine for 7 more days, and the test will be done again on the 2nd, the 4th, and the 7th day. Interestingly, for even domestic arrivals in Mumbai, RT-PCR test is a must, and for Mumbai-bound citizens, a pre-flight RT-PCR test will also be required. But remember, the Union Health Ministry has not taken very kindly to these very stringent guidelines coming in from Maharashtra, and they've been asked to take a relook at them. Basically, the Union government saying we are looking at one nation, one travel guideline. So expect more changes coming in there if you are landing in Maharashtra. Let's get to the national capital next and get to Delhi. Now, in Delhi, what happens is no compulsory quarantine has been put in just yet, but a mandatory RT-PCR testing will be required. Here, if you test positive, you will be shifted to the LNJP hospital. A negative test will mean you will have to go into home quarantine and test again on the 8th day. Testing, when it comes to that, 2 kinds at the moment. When you land here in the national capital, 2 kinds of RT-PCR testings are happening. One that could cost you 4,000 rupees roughly. That will take about 1 hour or so. And another, the regular standard RT-PCR testing, which will cost about 500 bucks, but will take about 5 to 6 hours. Let's take you to the next stop, which will see a lot of international passengers as well. Chennai Airport. There, if you land, the positive will mean that you're shifted to a hospital there itself, and negative will mean home quarantine, and after 7 days, there will be a test on the 8th day. Similar, 2 kinds of rapid PCR and RT-PCR happening, 4,900 there in Chennai. Now, expect all these changes to keep happening and a lot of revisions to take place. Stay tuned to NDTV for all those details. Now, like we talked about that, the Maharashtra government has begun revising its stringent guidelines already. This because, like I said, the Union Health Ministry has not taken very kindly to Maharashtra having different set of rules and travel guidelines. Basically saying this is one nation and there should be one travel policy as well. This could mean that in the coming days, the current set of rules that have been laid out by the Maharashtra government could see a revision.
The Maharashtra government, after several conversations with the centre and after taking a look at some of their own rules, once again have decided that they need to start the process of revising the rules. Now, this has also come at a time when Rajesh Bhushan, the Union Health Secretary, wrote this letter. Now, this letter basically says that the norms for travellers announced by the Maharashtra government were incongruent with the rules which the centre has actually established. Now, there were 2 specific rules which the Maharashtra government was trying to enforce. All of this is being done is because people are worried about the spread of Omicron. One of those rules actually had to do with domestic RT-PCR, domestic RT-PCR requirements. And the centre has now said, the Maharashtra government has now said that those RT-PCR requirements have to actually be done by under different circumstances. It has to be not what the Maharashtra government had wanted, which was 72 hours prior to travel within the country. You need to do an RT-PCR test. Instead, what the centre has now told the state government, and what the state government has agreed to do, is that if you are fully vaccinated and are travelling to Mumbai, you will not need to do an RT-PCR test. So that deals with domestic passengers. The other big concern was, in fact, passengers who were coming from outside the country, from so-called at-risk nations, essentially European nations and the United Kingdom, a couple of African nations as well, who according to the centre would have to do an RT-PCR test, but if they cleared that test at the airport, they were free to leave the airport, but they had to quarantine at their own home or in a hotel for 7 days. The Maharashtra government had much more stringent requirements, and in those requirements they basically said that you have to clear an RT-PCR test at the airport, but then you will have to go in for institutional quarantine at a hotel or in a government centre for a period of 14 days. That is something which the Maharashtra government, as we understand it, may start re-looking at again, particularly in light of what the centre has actually written to the state government. So it's been fairly confusing, a lot of back and forth. In fact, yesterday night, when the Maharashtra government order came out saying that passengers who arrive from these at-risk countries would need to go to a hotel or to a government centre and they would be institutionalized, 3 planes, each 350 seaters, were already on their way from the United Kingdom. So 1,000+ passengers who did not actually know that they would be forced into or pushed into institutional quarantine were in fact in the dark. So they would have landed, but fortunately the Maharashtra government did act in time. They realized the concerns that these passengers would have faced and they didn't enforce the rules. And it appears now that there is this communication that's happening and they are looking at all of this very, very closely. It's a story we'll be tracking very closely as well on NDTV.